and this is by Yolanda Wisher, who is a Philadelphia poet and a friend of the Writers' House, and currently the Poet Laureate of the city of Philadelphia. We're very pleased, and we're excited to add this poem to ModPo Plus. And I'm not really sure where to add it, so for those veterans of ModPo, I hope you will post to Twitter or to the Facebook group and tell us where we should add it. We don't yet have a recording of Yolanda performing this poem, but we're going to ask her to do it. I'm sure she'd be happy to do it. It's from a book that I have just finished reading. It's called Monk Eats an Afro. Monk meaning Thelonious Monk. Monk eats an afro. And this is called From Imhotep's Kundalini. And here we go. I'm going to read it. I'm going to do a bad job reading it, but believe me, at some point soon we'll replace my reading of it with Yolanda's. Here we go. What thoughts I have of you tonight, Du Bois, of bodies rocked and minds embalmed in bark. Our blanched arrival, I said blanched, it could be just blanched. Our blanched arrival seethen with scandal's mark. Nowadays I peep you in the bean pie seller's poise. With that silhouette fit for bust or cameo, I can't always divine your debonair birth or your buku brain laborin' like an earth in hallelujah's ether, somehow duckin' death's blow. Sure sprung from Imhotep's Kundalini, stitchin' white reconstruction's funeral shroud, scriptin' Philly, as in Philadelphia, scriptin' Philly dirges for the crying out loud, cussin' Garvey's name over martinis. Sometimes I wonder if you double agent on the page or mastermind our ordered rage. Whoa. All right, we have not talked about this poem. I don't know how much preparation anybody has done. Emily, as usual, has taken no notes. All right. Dave Poplar, Imhotep, did you look it up?
Yeah, he was an Egyptian who was considered the first, one of the very first architects and engineers, and I believe I read that he was even almost canonized after he died. He was very, very influential and responsible for one of the very famous pyramids.
Great. And he was also, he was the chancellor, basically, to the pharaoh, right-hand person, chief advisor. But he also was born a commoner, and probably the only one in that position ever to have been born a commoner. Okay, let's see. Max, did you look up Kundalini?
I was just looking it up right as you asked me.
No, that's okay. That's fine. Who looked up Kundalini? Anna, did you look up Kundalini? You didn't?
I did, but I lost
I have it in front of me, Al, if you'd like
Go
to
ahead.
see
Let's hear it.
Kundalini in yogic theory is a primal energy or Shakti located at the base of the spine.
Good. It's coiled. It's said to be. We needed Molly here. It's said to be coiled at the spine, and it has great potential to be released through the body. So it's Imhotep's Kundalini as his essential yogic energy. Okay, we don't know what that means. It's a phrase that happens in the poem, but we don't know what that means. Okay, first line, Erica Kaufman. It's an echo of a famous ModPo line. Yes, Erica Kaufman?
Yep. Ginsberg.
Ginsberg, which one?
Supermarket in California.
Okay. Supermarket in California. Yeah, it's the first line, right? It's what thoughts I have of you tonight, Walt Whitman. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Erica, see if you can riff this. So Walt Whitman, Allen Ginsberg is to Walt Whitman as Yolanda Wisher is to W.E.B. Du Bois. Can we do anything with that ratio?
Well, I mean, I think that it's thinking about a sense of lineage and a sense of history in writing.
Yes. So in the case of Ginsberg, he's seeking encouragement from Whitman, who was like, as he was in the supermarket, isolated, marginalized, gay poets, and he's thought of as an encourager. In the case of Yolanda Wisher, trying to channel Du Bois, it's complicated. How is it complicated? Chris Mustaza, any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I was thinking about the idea of like double consciousness from the Souls of Black Folk,
And we know that's in the poem because there's a reference to it later, isn't there?
right, double agent.
The double agent. Du Bois is in a way a double agent in African American politics and culture. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Can you summarize in a sentence what that double agency is?
The idea of double consciousness, or the fact that you view yourself both through the eyes of a primarily like white majority, as well as through the eyes of your own heritage at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And double agent is a powerful phrase that suggests, Emily.
It suggests something traitorous on the one hand,
Right.
An ambivalent relationship to a particular demographic, a particular heritage.
Right. All right. Let's look at the prosody for a second. Okay, I'm going to read the first couple lines. Anna Strong, how are you doing on prosody these days?
Let's see how it goes.
Okay. What thoughts
Try
I
me.
have of you tonight, Du Bois, because I'm really doing it.
Thanks.
Right. Right. Yeah. Something that
Just
that
tee it up
doesn't
for me.
love a wall, making Frost's non-iambic line into an iambic line. I just gave it to you. What thoughts I have of you tonight, Du Bois. How many beats?
5.
5. Is that important?
Yes.
Yeah. How so?
Because 5 lines is a traditional iambic
Not
line.
lines.
5 beats.
5 beats in a line is
Iambic.
no. An iamb is a single foot.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I have of you tonight. It's a single iamb. When you have 5 of them, what's it called?
Iambic
Emily
pentameter.
Harnett, master's,
Oh, God.
MA from Yale University. Oh my goodness, Eric. It's iambic pentameter, says Chris
Yep,
Mustaza. Okay, iambic pentameter. And Jake Marmer, I know you don't do iambic pentameter in your poetry.
Yeah.
However, what's iambic pentameter associated with when it's used?
Shakespeare.
Well, classic.
Classic, that's a nice
rhymed
evasive word.
ballads
Yes.
and obviously sonnets, which
Yes,
is
sonnets,
weird.
Shakespearean sonnets of what thoughts I have of you tonight, Du Bois, of bodies rocked and minds embalmed in bark.
Wait, there's 14 lines.
There's 14 lines in this poem, and it's rhymed. A, B, B, A. C, D, D, C. Cameo, birth, earth, blow. C, D, D, C. E, F, F, E. Kundalini, shroud, loud, martinis. Kundalini, martinis. E, F, F, E. And then G, G, the couplet at the end. So it is it an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, or a Shakespearean or Elizabethan sonnet?
Is it any of those?
Well, it is more like a Shakespearean or Elizabethan sonnet in that it's 3 quatrains and then a rhyming couplet. It's different in that a classic Shakespearean sonnet or Elizabethan sonnet is A-B-A-B, not A-B-B-A. So it's it's a somewhat modified Shakespearean sonnet. Okay, now, Max, or anyone, Max and Anna, we have Yolanda Wisher grappling Ginsberg-like with Du Bois, writing a Shakespearean sonnet with iambic pentameter, double agency. Who wants to say something? Max, are you ready to just deal in a general way with what Yolanda Wisher is trying to do here?
Well, it doesn't seem to add up, right? That's I think
Doesn't
that's
seem
what
to
we're
add
supposed
up.
to,
Yep.
supposed to get from it. It's she's writing in this very strict form, trying to do something that's potentially more radical, right? So there's some kind of tension there that we need to pick apart.
So in the language, it's not Shakespearean language, right? Or your buku brain laboring like an earth in hallelujah's ether, somehow ducking death's blow. By the way, death's blow, Chris Mustaza, death's blow. Uh-oh, anybody? It's a ModPo poem, Death's Blow. Death's Blow, Claude McKay.
If we must die.
If we must die. So we got McKay, who's calling for revolution in a sonnet. This is a ModPo poem. Now we have Yolanda Wisher doing a sonnet, maybe using the same Trojan horse strategy that Claude McKay used, maybe against Du Bois or trying to point out the double agency of Du Bois. There's a lot of people stroking their chins. Can we get the portable mic to Eric? And meanwhile, Emily, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it just
You like
seems.
this?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? And all of us are scratching our heads about it. But I think, and I don't want to mischaracterize the Claude McKay because I don't, it's not in front of me. But it seems that this is revisiting those themes and maybe doing them a little bit more effectively, or tipping the sonnet form on its head and using the sonnet form to talk about something like double agency in a kind of complex and contradictory identity, in a complex and contradictory relationship to a kind of literary patrilineage that Du Bois is implicated in here.
And somehow ducking, as in ducking, avoiding, somehow ducking death's blow, sure sprung from Imhotep's Kundalini. Is it that the ability to avoid the consequence of Black Revolution is the fate of Du Bois with his relatively genteel philosophy of existing as an African American in the culture, which goes along with the seemingly safe sonnet, somehow ducking death's blow, sure sprung from the not yet uncoiled yogic primal energy of the common-born chancellor, the second in command. It's quite an interesting thing. Who was? Oh, it was Eric who was going to say something. Eric?
I think Kundalini is
Right
something
up to the mic.
Kundalini is something that Ginsberg plays with a lot too. It's a word that she finds there. Ginsberg and the beats and that language that we think about as being so open and almost Whitmanian, she's picking up on the fact, I think, that the beats are listening all the time to jazz, and she's found a way to invert the interior sonic music of this sonnet to, instead of where Claude McKay is playing a very Anglophile sonic register, Yolanda is claiming back the African American musical roots and giving us back the beats as a Black sound that both accounts for the use of traditional forms, which I think many, not all, but many African American poets have been, especially during the Harlem Renaissance, thought of as playing a kind of aesthetically safe game to some extent.
In the case of McKay and County Cullen and a few others.
Absolutely. And Yolanda's saying, well, look, we can still see how this form, this European form that Shakespeare is using, if we handle it just right, really renders up this great African-American jazz tradition, which was so central in bringing the beats and Whitmanian language back to the sound of American poetry.
That's brilliant. That's so well said and well synthesized. We're going to continue for a few more minutes on this poem, which is exciting, and this is classic ModPo for those watching. We've not prepared this. We're looking at something fresh, and we're making something of it, and we're hoping that everybody kind of works along with us. Okay, so I'm going to quote the last two lines, and I'm going to go around and give everybody a chance to say one thing about this poem, either about the last two lines or really what Yolanda Wisher is doing. And anyone who wants to suggest where in ModPo this poem, where in ModPo Plus, which week it belongs in, for new members of the ModPo community, obviously you won't be able to do that because you haven't seen the course yet. But for veterans, where does this go? How does it fit? I think it's a very interesting question. Okay.
Some possibilities for my Twitter poll.
Oh, well, that will come. Yeah, all right. The chapter in which we encounter Claude McKay and County Cullen, and really the spirit of W.E.B. Du Bois is, of course, chapter 3. Sorry, 4. Chapter 3 is the Communist Poets. Chapter 4. But what are some options? All right, we could put it parallel to the Supermarket in California poet, where Ginsberg seeks encouragement from a predecessor. That's another option. But there are other places. I'll read the last two lines and we'll go around. We'll start with Dave Poplar and then go to Jake Marmer and so on. Sometimes I wonder if you double agent on the page or mastermind of our ordered rage. It's pretty heavy stuff. Dave Poplar, can you do anything with those last two lines or say anything about the poem?
Here's a thought. What about W.E.B. Du Bois as a sonnet himself? He had a very formalistic, traditional background, but at the same time, he's still an outsider. And I think this sonnet shows the conflict using terms like buku, brain, laborin, things like that, where those are outsider slang terms still in this very traditional, formalistic format, and it ultimately ends with being an ordered rage. It's almost about to burst. It just doesn't work that well. So in a sense, W.E.B. Du Bois himself may be a sonnet.
That's great. Ordered rage, Dave. Ordered rage. It's a paradox, right?
Very much so.
Mm-hmm. And is this sonnet an ordered rage?
I think you can look at it that way because of the language. If you look, there's so much slang, seethin with scandals marked. Nowadays, there's these slangy terms. There's no capitalization. There's no punctuation.
So Yolanda Wisher is expressing frustration, possibly anger, possibly revolutionary anger within the sonnet. And basically,
Yolanda Wisher is also a graduate of Lafayette College, my alma mater. Just wanted to put that out there. Meaning that's
just one of those fun facts.
Just one of those fun facts. Yeah.
Jake Marmer. So you've never written a sonnet, I'll bet.
In fact, I have. I took a prosody course, graduate school.
And were you very happy and comfortable and feeling happily confined inside the sonnet? Somehow I doubt that.
Yeah. Well, it's a challenging but wonderful form. I keep thinking about Imhotep's Kundalini, like what does that actually mean, or does it at all mean anything? I mean, from my yoga classes, I remember Kundalini is like has something to do with subconscious, right? So it's like the potential, right? The dark energy. So it's the kind of like the subconscious energy of this architect, maybe an intuitive hope for structure. Or something like that, which kind of echoes the idea of ordered rage.
Yeah.
This desire to make rage ordered and
good.
Orderly and organizable.
That's really good, Jake. And the mastermind, the accusation that he is the mastermind of this, it has a mostly negative connotation. Like you put us in this position with your powerful theories of race in America. You're the mastermind. You're why I'm stuck inside this sonnet. Max McKenna, thought about the last line, or maybe about where this fits in ModPo, or any of this?
It's such a confounding ending, and it doesn't function like the turn of a sonnet ought to, and that it refuses to resolve one way or the other, and it sort of remains a double agent until the end. And I can't quite make sense of it. I can't tell if being a double agent on the page is a good or a bad thing. It seems to be that she's accusing Du Bois of this, but then again, like, double agency can also be a means of subversion and also a kind of radical political action in itself, right? Ordered rage, that seems to be a bad thing, right, as a paradox. But then again, I don't know if making art out of rage, that it has also some kind of political effect, potentially, in its ordering. I don't know. It's tricky because it doesn't really go one way or the other, and maybe that's really where the full force of this comes from, is that it really is this subverted sonnet because it refuses to resolve. It doesn't turn so much as it just kind of turns you around, really.
That's well said. Wisher's or the speaker's anger is clearest perhaps in the third stanza, just after we hear the speaker describe Du Bois as having avoided death, the death that might come if you're a revolutionary in response to the racist hatred of the situation, and that that duckin sure springs from the primal energy. Stitchin' white reconstructions, funeral shrouds. So the duckin, the act of duckin, to mix the metaphor, is the thing that actually weaves the shroud, that scripts, that writes, that bespeaks dirges, Philadelphia dirges, right, over deaths, presumably in the black community, for the crying out loud, which is a pun, crying out loud meaning the crying at a funeral in Philly, but crying out loud, of course, exasperated for crying out loud, while cussin', meaning cursing, Garvey, Marcus Garvey, whose response to the situation at the beginning of the 20th century was to suggest that perhaps black Americans should migrate back to Liberia, I think, right? Liberia. So Garveyism is this radical separation. Cussing Garvey's name. Who would cuss Garvey's name? W.E.B. Du Bois, who was much more an integrationist, over martinis. So cussing Garvey over martinis suggests that Du Bois is off having martinis while all this bad stuff is going down. Then the last couplet. Sometimes I wonder if you double agent on the page, if you are a double agent on the page, or alternatively, the mastermind of where I'm stuck literarily. So this is really, Erica Kaufman, can you shed some light on any of this? How are you doing?
I've never read this poem before we were, and I've actually never read Yolanda Wisher's work before, and I love this poem. I think it's a fabulous, fascinating, really hard poem.
Can you say what some of the things that you love about it?
Well, you just said, I've been thinking a lot about the Du Bois-Garvey juxtaposition, and how that goes back to, the two of them being on somewhat opposite poles in terms of their theories about race relations. And then I'm also thinking back to Dave Poplar's amazing idea that maybe Du Bois is a sonnet himself, which makes a lot of sense to me given the movement of the poem. And then I'm also I kind of live in yoga land, so if I could be totally wrong, but I think that the Kundalini, it's in your spine and it feels electric, and it's supposed to help you get enlightenment. Does anybody know if that's...
Yeah, that's according to the definition that I read. That's right.
Yeah, so all of these things are kind of swirling around in my head together, and making me wonder if this poem is in its own way sort of a search for enlightenment of some kind, or a quest to make sense out of what one can't quite make sense of. Yeah,
that's really well put. Anthony Risser, who tweets as neuropsychology, quotes Cussin Garvey's name over martinis and says puts us in mind of Langston Hughes' Dinner Guest Me, which is a poem we deal with in ModPo. I think that's a really great suggestion. Chris, a final thought on this, or idea about where it fits in ModPo or anything?
Sure. I mean, the poem itself, its consciousness seems to move back and forth between Africa and America. You have the idea of Imhotep. I read the second line of bodies rocked and minds embalmed in bark as a kind of maybe referencing the Middle Passage in a way. And then you have the Garvey back to Africa. So it felt like the poem itself is enacting this double consciousness in a way.
Yeah, it's really well put and good context. Thank you. Anna Strong, your thought?
Do I get to say anything? Do I get to say anything?
Yeah.
The thing that I sort of thought that I keep coming back to is the sort of way that this poem positions itself in terms of its inheritance. in the sense that the way that she's immediately positioning herself in relationship to Ginsburg and then Du Bois, and then dealing with all of the various, I guess, references, sort of identification moments she sort of brings in from all of these different disparate elements of culture and whatever, to me means that, no poetic inheritance is uncomplicated.
Yes.
There's no direct lineage from like Ginsburg to Whitman.
No poetic inheritance is uncomplicated.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, right?
There's one thing, Al, that
Wait. Eric doesn't have a mic. Give him the mic.
I was just going to say, there's one thing I think you are uniquely positioned to see, which is...
I, myself.
Yes, indeed, as a Stevens scholar.
Wallace Stevens.
Right.
You have to turn the mic on.
I'm so sorry. I apologize. That relationship between Ramon Hernandez and Wallace Stevens, and the rage for order, Pale Ramon.
So this is the idea of order. You're referring to the idea of order in Key West.
Right, and there's this ghosting of that as well.
Ghostly demarcations, keener sounds, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wallace Stevens everywhere. Emily Harnett, what do you think of this poem? Is it too hard? What about its obscurity? I don't actually think of it as hard. When I read the iambic pentameter and realize it's a sonnet, I'm suddenly enabled in the way I am with Claude McKay's poem. Okay, this has got to be critiquing the sonnet. Now I know where to start. Am I right about that? And what other thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I think you're right. This poem does cue you in on how to read it, but I think because it does position itself in explicit relationship to another poem, and a poem that everyone in this course knows really well, which is the Ginsburg. And comparatively, it's a lot more difficult than that one, because we know pretty much how Ginsburg relates to Whitman. For one, the motive
Positively.
Very positively. Whoops, that is my phone ringing. But yeah, whereas this, it doesn't really seem to me, thinking about the Ginsburg, that Ginsburg is asking a question about Whitman. He knows exactly how he feels, and he knows how the culture relates to Whitman, which is sad, but it's something which is stable, and that he's not really confused about. Whereas this is a poet who's asking a question formally and in terms of content that even she doesn't know the answer to, and that necessarily we as readers don't really know the answer to either. We can just rephrase for ourselves the same question that she's asking herself as a poet.
Yeah.
And maybe in that same sense, it's a little bit easier for one white male poet to claim another white male poet as a direct influence and have us all be like, yeah, sure, totally. There you go. You and Whitman, you guys are pals. It makes sense.
No, I think you're right. The race and literary descendants or inheritance, it's very complicated when political strategies are at stake.
Yeah.
And it's not clear how Walt Whitman's political strategy because he had such a love affair with the United States, for better or worse, that it's not clear that complicates Ginsburg's situation. So it can be a very personal situation about marginalization because of his sexual preferences and because of his status as a poet in the 1950s when that poem Supermarket in California is set. But here we have a much more complicated relationship. I mean, for me, the saddest phrase is, or your beaucoup brain, meaning you were a really smart guy, Du Bois. Your big brain, laboring like an earth in Hallelujah's ether. And it's in that state ducks death's blow. Right, so it's very hard to accuse someone of ducking death's blow when they've been laboring like an earth in Hallelujah's ether. I mean, this is not simply a criticism.